If you read your bugle that are in your boxes, so you should pick it up, make sure you do that. If you read that, you'll see that I wrote about graduations and the idea that I'll be speaking at the baccalaureate for the Windsor High School folks, just doing 2 different blessings. But it put a lot into my mind about when I was teaching at Blue Ridge anyway. Every year I wrote a poem for that graduating class. And so as a way of trying to prepare me, I read a lot of those this week. And I was thinking how many of them talk about the idea that graduation is not the end, but the beginning. That focusing on the fact of what you've accomplished or what the graduates had accomplished up until that point was merely the starting of the rest of their life, where they use that knowledge or that skills base that they had created to move forward. It's interesting to think about because we have made it to the graduation ceremony of the Bible in some ways, where everything that they've been working up until this point is being fulfilled. I said this is the high point in the story of the Israelites as we find it in the Old Testament. These are the people that we have been following since the beginning. Since their patriarch, Abram, was called by God to leave the city of Ur, which we know is at the base of the river Euphrates, on the outside of the land of Mesopotamia. It was a city within the Sumerian culture, and then the old kingdom of the Babylonians comes in, and that's of the Hanging Gardens and the Code of Hammurabi Babylonians. Abram leaves all of this, all of that civilization behind, called by God. He has his name changed to Abraham. Paul tells us that his faith was accounted to him as righteousness, and the story of it all begins. It leads to slavery in Egypt many years later, bitter bondage until Moses, the deliverer, was led by God, who performed for them miracle after miracle. 10 plagues, the Red Sea parting. When they needed food from heaven, it fell as manna. When they needed water, it came pouring out of a rock. When they turned away, God remained faithful, gave them a passage through the desert to a land flowing with milk and honey. The people are reminded to tell this story again and again, to tell this story to themselves and to tell it to their children, to bear their first fruits of all of their labors and offer them, saying these words: "My father was a wandering Aramean, and he went down into Egypt with a few people and lived there and became a great nation, powerful and numerous. But the Egyptians mistreated us and made us suffer, subjecting us to harsh labor. Then we cried out to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our misery, toil, and oppression. So the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terror and with signs and wonders. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now I bring the first fruits of the soil that you, Lord, have given to me." They are to offer. They are to sacrifice. They are to obey the laws of the Lord. They are to tell their children, to teach their children what their story is, to teach them what God has taught them, to teach them to obey, to teach them to observe, to teach them to follow, to teach them to be God's people, and to always have Him as their God and their Lord. A new thing was born into the world, a people blessed to have God and know exactly what is expected of them, and to live and to thrive and to enter a land flowing with milk and honey, the very things they need to thrive. Through conquest with Joshua, to a sorting out of finishing the job in Judges, to the first king Saul, to David, who settled in Jerusalem, spread the borders of the kingdom, building for himself a palace of the finest wood from Lebanon. All of this takes place, but David himself could not build this temple. No, it was for the next generation to complete this work. It was that special that there was restrictions around how it was to be done. That not just anybody could build it. And now finally, all of this has come to be. Solomon is king, and he builds the temple for God just as his father David had instructed. And the wealth of Solomon's kingdom is extensive. When we study history, ancient history in school, and when we read the Bible, we think about the power of Egypt, the power of Assyria, the power of Babylon. We think about all of these things as static, huge superpowers of the ancient world. But this reality, it's all already come to be, or it's in the future. At this point, Solomon's kingdom is the power of the known world. The Israelites are not downtrodden slaves anymore, and they are not exiled people like they will become. They are the power in the area and in the world. The riches that they have are immense. Their power is secure. And it's shown because representatives from other kingdoms in the story, they come to Solomon, and they're overtly impressed by everything that he has. The Queen of Sheba comes there and says, wow, this is amazing what you have amassed. The Bible is a unique book for all the religious and holy reasons that we believe it to be about, right? It's the Word of God, all the things that we observe about it. But it's also unique because it is written by and written for the oppressed. The old adage of the world is that the victors write the history. But in this case, these are not the victors. When this temple that we are celebrating is destroyed, because it will be, this kingdom comes to an end. And the oppression begins anew and lasts into the New Testament times and even beyond into our own. That defeat shapes a new theology and a new understanding about God that we'll read about when we read the prophets and others like it. But all of that is in the future. All of that future oppression, that's all in the future. We cannot forget at this point that this is a truly rich and powerful kingdom where everyone has something. Everyone has their own vine and fig tree. Everyone has something. Everyone shares in this prosperity. Wise Solomon, sitting at the head of all of this. This is the wise king who asked for wisdom rather than wealth and power, and God gave him all three. And he builds a shining temple, a house for God, a house for God's glory to sit, and it does. This is what has been built, and this is what's being dedicated in the reading that Liz did this morning. It's a celebration. It is a joyous occasion. I can't even imagine the celebration that Solomon is standing and speaking at this point. I was trying to figure out how to describe it. And how do you describe the victorious trumpets and the excitement of everything, 1,000 years of work leading up to one major moment of satisfaction? But I have a hard time reveling in it. I really do. I don't know why. I couldn't get up for the good times this time when I was reading about these times. I don't know why exactly. Maybe it's because I know what's going to happen to this temple. And I know what's going to happen to this kingdom. And because I've read tomorrow's reading, I know what's going to happen to Solomon. You're going to read about tomorrow. 1,000 wives to blame it all on. I know that this is a glorious high point, but I know that it's not a lasting one. I think the cleaning analogy is pretty good. The moment that you clean something and it gets to be as good as you can get it to be, it starts to get dirty from that point on. I know the glorious high point is not going to last. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's really what's at the root of my problem. There's certainly enough there, right? It's a pretty tragic history of where this temple goes. But I've known all of that before, right? I've known all of that before, and I've read this and been excited about it. And I've read it with great joy. But this time, what is it different about this time? Is it because I see in this glorious day, this ceremony of dedication, not the high point and culmination, but instead the beginning of the end? I see the shining flecks of gold. This ceremony, this shining flecks of gold that they put over the glorious cedars from Lebanon, as if those weren't ornate enough. But for some reason, I can see the flecks of gold chipping away. Here, when they are cutting the tape on the construction, here when everyone is celebrating, here when nothing has gone wrong yet, here when all the pews are full, here when all the pledges have been made, here when the budget is completely fulfilled, here when all the money has been raised for the new building fund and the building has been constructed, here when the war has been won, here when the wall has come down. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and it is. It's torn down. Here at this time of great peace and prosperity, did any of them see it? Did any of them at that moment say, wait a second, there's some holes in this foundation. There's some difficulties that we have in our hearts. And I ask myself this question too. Would I have those thoughts about this if I were them? If I was caught up in the celebration? If I was just one of the excited adherents looking at this thing that we as a nation have built with a source of pride that comes with exactly what it is? Do I feel that way, that I have difficulty with this? Is it because we live in a time of seeming decline? We don't live at that high point. We live at a point that remembers the high point in the past. This isn't the high water time right now. Is that why I'm more drawn to failures? And how we look at those failures and how we can learn from those failures. Is that why I'm not excited about learning from the happiness of the crowd, but instead what we can learn about the next steps and the decline and where it goes? Is it because I'm wondering how and what it takes to build the next high water mark, not reveling in the last one? We talk a lot about cycles in the Old Testament. You see the cycles of kings, cycles of growing closer to God, falling from God. There's this one about the 80-year four-generation cycle that spans the 80 years, and there's an up and down to it. There's the old proverb that says, good times build weak men build bad times build strong men build good times. A cycle. Maybe it's that, I wonder. The last amazing, big, huge time celebration like this was probably in 1945. That place of excitement and a feeling of satisfaction that the war was won, a new world had been won, a new world was being built, and the excitement of that. I doubt anyone that was living in 1945 would have predicted the world the way it is today. Impossible, they would say. But we, because we live now, we can look back and trace it. We can talk about the seeds that were planted along the way that have brought us back down. Now, maybe that's part of the cycle to build back up, to learn from those mistakes and move forward. We haven't started doing that yet, but we're hoping that maybe we might. They couldn't see this, but we could see that, right? They at that time, they couldn't look forward and say, wow, this is all going to fall apart. They were just excited about what had been accomplished. So what do I see when I read the Bible and I read of this section, this chapter, chapter 8, where the temple is being built or has been built? Solomon gets up and gives this speech. Listen to this. This is the one he gives right after the one that Liz read. The Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept your promise to your servant David, my father, with your mouth. You have promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it as it is today. Okay, so far so good. Lots of you there talking about what God has done. Now, Lord, the God of Israel, keep for your servant David, my father, the promises you made to him when you said, you shall never fail to have a successor to sit before me on the throne of Israel. If only your descendants are careful in all they do to walk before me faithfully as you have done. And now, God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David, my father, come true. Okay. The onus is starting to be on God here. But will God really dwell on earth? He says. The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? Sounds good so far. Yet give attention. There's always a but, right? This is the greatest thing here. And then all of a sudden, yet. Give attention to your servant's prayer and his plea for mercy, Lord my God. Hear the cry of the prayer that your servant is praying in your presence this day. May your eyes be open toward this temple night and day, this place of which you said, my name shall be there, so that you will hear the prayer your servant prays toward this place. Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray towards this place. Hear from heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. Interesting point of view. We built this temple. You made these promises. Own up. Maybe we do deserve to say that to God. When anyone wrongs their neighbor and is required to take an oath, and they come and swear the oath before your altar in this temple, then hear from heaven and act. Judge between your servants, condemning the guilty by bringing down on their heads what they have done, and vindicating the innocent by treating them in accordance with their innocence. What do you all think about the medieval practice of justice by ordeal? Like, take your hand, put it in the boiling water. If it heals right, you're innocent. Sounds almost pagan to us. What about throwing a witch in the water, and if she floats? When your people, Israel, have defeated or have been defeated by an enemy because they have sinned against you, and when they turn back to you and give praise to your name, praying and making supplication to you in this temple, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel and bring them back to the land you gave to their ancestors. Okay. God of war, we pray to you that even in defeat, you will restore us back to this if we turn to you. It's not necessarily pagan, but it's certainly on the lines of it. But I had this question, right? What do we deserve to hold God accountable for? We all like the God, good luck charm, the God of the insurance policy, the God that makes sure that everything's okay. Does he owe that to us? When famine or plague comes to the land, or blight or mildew, locusts or grasshoppers, and when an enemy besieges them in any of their cities, whatever disaster or disease may come, and when a prayer or plea is made by anyone among your people Israel, being aware of the afflictions of their own hearts and spreading out their hands toward this temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place, forgive and act, deal with everyone according to all they do, since you know their hearts, for you alone know every human heart, so that they will fear you in all the time they live in the land you gave your ancestors. There's a lot of if-then going on here. And it's not God necessarily saying if-then, it's Solomon saying if-then. Why does he have that? Because they built the temple now. Now he's going to, or the writer of Kings is going to blame all of this on 1,000 foreign wives. His turn from the paragon of monotheism and God's soldier, the builder of the temple, to dabbling in worship of Astarte and Moloch and some of the others. He's going to blame all that on the foreign wives. And maybe they had something to do. But I would say the seeds of his pagan leanings are already here. He's already looking at the fact, because we did this, God, you need to now do this. That is the center of what the pagan heart wants. The center of what the human heart wants. I want the world to be made in my image. There's a poem called The Fairy Queen, which is undecipherable. I do not recommend you having to read it. English majors, we had to. It's written by Edmund Spenser, and the Spenserian stanza is this really in fancy way of rhyming and all these requirements. So you can imagine, the more rhyming requirements you put on something, the more difficult it is to get an idea across. So that book's like real thick, because he takes his time getting those ideas across, and your mind's gonna wander. So they have these wonderful things called prose translations of the same. So one of his books is the story of the Red Cross Knight. The Red Cross Knight wants to make his bones. He wants to be chosen to go do this quest, but he's never done a quest like that before. And so the queen gives him the armor of God, basically. He equips him with the armor of God, and he sends him off. Now, he himself is not worthy of any of this. He's just clothed in it. There's a lot of symbolic parts to the journey, but one of the most important ones is when he comes to the house of pride. And the way that the house of pride is described, with its appearance of gold flecked siding, and the appearance of the cedars of Lebanon. One of the things that he sees when he leaves the house of gold is that if you just push on the wall, it all falls down. It just looks like it's really beautiful. One of the most amazing parts of that is everyone is looking at someone else in the house of pride. All people are looking at the king and the queen that sit at the top. They're all looking up. They're looking at the people between them and the queen. Everything is about looking and comparing yourself to where everyone else is. And at the top of that is the queen, and everybody's staring, and they're dancing, and they're celebrating, and they don't realize why the floor is crunchy. The floor is crunchy because at the base of the floor is all of the bones of anybody that's ever been there and trampled by this whole house of pride. Maybe it didn't start that way, but it's gotten to be that way. Solomon following Moloch and Astarte and whatever else, I mean, these are pretty horrible things. Child sacrifice. It's amazing that at our highest point, the seeds are already being placed for the low. Because there's something about it that the foundation of a building that we build with our hands never quite is in the right place. Christ calls us to a different kind of temple. One where He is the cornerstone. One where He is the center of all that we build upon. One where He is directly in our hearts, because our bodies are the temple. Not that we have built, but that He has built and given us. The amazing peace of humility is one that keeps us from making that slow fall that the Israelites will face. Have we learned any of those lessons? Are we learning them now? I think we have. I think that we're learning a lot of lessons today that are important for us. The lessons that success doesn't come from numbers. The idea that there's more to a church than its budget. The idea that it's more to the connections that we have with each other that last. The more that church can be defined outside of this 11 o'clock hour. Someday we may learn that church needs to exist beyond a budget and beyond a building and beyond what we've always thought church was. And we'll find when those things come down that our connection with God does not change if we are truly laying our foundation on Jesus Christ and nothing else. All the rest of it will come down, and that will remain. And that's what the Israelites will learn. We'll learn that this summer as we continue to read. We'll see that slow decline, and we'll see wise people rising up, being called by God to say, wait a second, what you're doing, what you're seeing, what you are trying to accomplish isn't necessarily what God wants. You'll see the Isaiahs and the Amoses and the Jeremiahs and the Ezekiels come forward and say, look, what you're building upon isn't God anymore. Turn back. And the invitation comes through them to Jesus Christ into our hearts to once again build with God as our foundation. It's on that idea that when we come to the table, I make sure that I don't say that this is our table. And I make sure to say that this table is not the table of the Presbyterian Church. That I make sure to say that it's certainly not my table, but that it is the table of Jesus Christ. And it is He Himself who invites us. And let nothing else be built upon it than that very thing. There's nothing ornate about this. Christ Himself calls us. It's bread and wine, juice. It is the basics. Let us come to His table. Just like the Israelites were called to remember and to say what it was that they believed, what it was that was true about their relationship with God, may we do the same as we say the Apostles' Creed, which is